This world constantly tugs at our faith. It pulls us away from God, uh, sometimes in subtle ways and sometimes in overt ways. Sometimes it might be just that distraction, some new hobby, maybe even a demanding job that causes us to neglect our devotion to God. Other times, it may be a direct temptation to sin or a pressuring upon us to conform in some way to the world's values instead of God's values. Since this world is, as Ephesians 2:2 says, since this world is following after the power of the evil one, it should be no surprise that the world wants to lead people away from the Lord. And that's what we start to see around us, especially if you have eyes to see. You begin to see that that's happening every day all around us. Now, in extreme cases, this world may even give stark choices between denying God or facing severe consequences. This is something that many early Christians faced. In the Roman Empire, for instance, there were those workers' guilds, and if you wanted employment, you would have to join one of the workers' guilds. The only problem is that on Friday nights, instead of just going to the local bar, as sometimes employees and employers would do, they went and engaged in some kind of feast dedicated to a pagan deity. And your participation would imply that you are engaged in idolatry with everyone else. So, how do you choose between feeding your family and your faith? That was a difficult choice. When persecutions intensified, some Christians would stand before Caesar and they would be faced with the choice to endure some horrible means of execution or just taking a pinch of incense and offering it to Caesar. That is quite the choice. And today, Christians in many parts of the world have trials such as the loss of income or the loss of family or even the loss of their lives. How do they face that? Well, they do so with the great cloud of witnesses that are before them, both in church history and in Scripture. And we see an example of those witnesses right here, these three Jewish men that are in this passage, who are named by the pagans around them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are the men that the writer of Hebrews undoubtedly had in mind when he penned that passage in the great hall of faith, where he was talking about those who quenched the power of fire, Hebrews 11:34. Peter also talked about those who endure fiery trials. Did he possibly have the fiery furnace in mind from Daniel 3? It's possible. Their courage inspired Christians from the earliest times, and they continue to encourage us today. Now, it's worth noting that this is a passage that many skeptics also look at, but they look at it with scorn. And that shouldn't surprise us, as they do just that with the rest of the Bible. But in this case, they believe or they disbelieve that the miraculous deliverance that God provides at the end of this chapter actually happened, that this was some kind of myth, some kind of legend that was built up, and that it is not true. And they base that evidence on a few vocabulary words that they find in this text. As we go through this text, you're going to see lists of rulers, lists of officials that some of which do come from the Persian language. And then you're going to see list of instruments, musical instruments, and some of those words come from the Greek language. And they say, aha, see, this must be someone who was not Daniel. This was someone who was writing much later, who had the knowledge of both the Persian language and the Greek language. Of course, someone writing much later wouldn't have used the kinds of words that Daniel uses here. He would have used a more modern version of the Greek and Persian words. The words that are used in this text do align with 6th century BC writers. And so there's no reason to disbelieve this. And the skeptics, in a kind of irony, a kind of transparently devilish irony, are trying to get us to cast doubt on a message that would give us strength to stand against them and the world. And so, no, we should believe this text. We should believe it. And we do see in this narrative that, yes, the world will push us into false worship, but we can stay strong. We can stay strong. And we'll see four parts this evening as we move through the narrative that demonstrate just that. The first part is verses 1 through 7, the drive toward idolatry, And you can see I took the image from last week and I made it golden. So that may very well have been what Nebuchadnezzar had in mind. He took the image from his dream and he decided to make a gold idol out of it. And so that is the drive toward idolatry. Second, we will see the demeaning for refusing idolatry. The world will mock you because you do not go after it in excess. And so we'll see the demeaning for refusing idolatry. Third, we will see the demand for idolatry that King Nebuchadnezzar gives in verses 13 through 15. And then fourth, we will see the defiance against idolatry. And there we have a very nice and even list of D words. I'm honoring my Southern Baptist heritage there. We have our 4 D words: the drive toward idolatry, the demeaning for refusing idolatry, the demand for idolatry, and then finally the defiance against idolatry. And so that is kind of the movement that we see in the text this evening. Let's look at the first one of those. I don't have a very detailed PowerPoint for you. I just have the points up this evening. Thank you for helping me back there. First, we have the drive toward idolatry, verses 1 through 7 in chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. And he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately, at that moment, be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, at the time when the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wow. So you'll note that there's quite a bit of repetition in this text, and that repetition is for a reason. There is something being emphasized here as we go through. There's actually many somethings which are being emphasized. What is Nebuchadnezzar doing? Well, emboldened by his dream that we read about in chapter 2, where Daniel identified him as the head of gold, he chooses to erect a golden image in apparent commemoration. Instead of just having a head of gold, though, the whole thing is overlaid with gold. Now, we're not told exactly when he does this. It's probably not the next day. It would have taken time to construct this. It would have taken time to gather enough gold to overlay this. It probably wasn't solid gold, but rather gold plated. And it would have taken time for messengers to go out and gather all of the peoples that are listed here. And so some commentaries suggest that this was a few years later. Other commentaries suggest that it might have been as many as 20 years later. There's even a estimate from in the Septuagint, I think, that says 18 years later. One commentary says that this was about the time Jerusalem was finally destroyed. But whatever the case, whatever the event, his idolatry signals that he is not yet fully converted to the God of Israel. And look at how many times the text says that he set it up. This wasn't someone else. This wasn't the blunder of his wise men. This was all Nebuchadnezzar. He set up this idol. And we read that several times. He set it up. He set it up. He set it up. This is condemnation. This is condemnation. He's the leader. He already has been introduced to the God of Israel, and he's building an idol. This is condemnation. Now, as I said, just as a mockery almost of the vision that he received, he creates a full image of gold, and the text uses the number of man here to describe the height of it. The number of man is 6. And of course, it is the number multiplied here, 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. And this might be foreshadowing the number of the beast that is in Revelation chapter 30 or chapter 13. This is something that is somewhat of a foreshadowing of what will happen in the tribulation period when the people of God will be forced, along with the rest of the world, to bow down before another image. And Nebuchadnezzar, very much so, is fulfilling a kind of antichrist role in this passage. And so that must also be seen here. Now, as we're looking at this, how tall of a statue are we talking about? Because we don't typically measure things in cubits today. Well, this would have been roughly the size of a 10-story building. It would have been about 90 feet tall. So that is massive. Now, as people have looked at, and they're like, okay, 60 cubits by 6 cubits, this would have been a very skinny statue. Some have used the term grotesque. And it's possible that Nebuchadnezzar wanted something that looked somewhat frightening, something that was disproportionate in appearance, I guess we could say. That's possible. But it's also possible that he is including in the estimation here a pedestal that the statue would have stood on. And so if we had a very tall pedestal, the proportions of the statue would have been more of a normal human size. And of course, this is something that other pagans did in the past. They created these great and massive statues. For instance, we might consider the Sphinx in Egypt, which is 240 feet long by 66 feet high. And so that's pretty large as well, as it overlooks the desert and it continues to stand. Well, that's still standing. Is there evidence of Nebuchadnezzar's structure? Well, it does appear so. Of course, that does rest on the question where this plain of Dura is, but a French archaeologist located the remains of a brick structure that was 45 foot square, and it was also 20 feet high. And it was about 4 miles south of ancient Babylon. So that could have formed the pedestal, as one commentary notes, of this massive image. And so it could have been standing on this large square pedestal, and that would have been the footrest for this large image. There have been other locations suggested, but that one makes sense because it is just outside of Babylon. Now, why did the king do this? Well, there's a lot of different reasons why he may have done it. One, of course, is just simple vanity, right? I mean, he is setting up an image that really is pointing to himself and to his great empire, the thing that he has built. Now, there's probably more at play. If this was, for instance, after the fall of Jerusalem and after other conquests, well, one commentary notes here that erecting the image suggests that he wanted to unify his empire and consolidate his authority as ruler. The image was to become the unifying center of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. And now, if you consider that, it makes a lot more sense why he wanted all of these important people to gather together for the dedication of this image. The image itself would become a symbol for the unity of the empire. He is creating a religious touchstone, and of course, that itself is also a foreshadowing of the Antichrist, as everyone in the world is united in one religious endeavor. And so we're seeing some shadows of what is to come here. We read here that he has summoned this vast assembly of officials, and this included satraps, which would have been large regional leaders, then prefects, which would have been military commanders, governors, which would have been civil administrators. And what you're going to see here is kind of this the authority kind of narrowing as we're going down here. Then you had the counselors, the treasurers, the judges. Obviously, those would be people who would be over civil cases, magistrates, and other provincial leaders. So these are all the important people, all of the officials in the government. And this list, which is repeated for emphasis, not only reflects the hierarchical structure, I can't speak tonight, of the Babylonian Empire, it also underscores the event's significance. This is an all hands on deck situation. He wants everybody who holds any kind of office to be there. This again talks about the kind of unity that he wants to create in the kingdom. He wants everybody in every position of power to all pledge fealty to one idea. namely himself. Now keep in mind that this included conquered territories. I've already mentioned that with the conquering of Judah, with the replacing of the king on the throne. He wants to make sure that all the conquered territories are not only subjugated, they remain subjugated. They remain his territories. And to do that, as we talked about in the first chapter here, he would typically take royal officials of the ethnicities of the peoples he had conquered, train them, and then send them back to become his mouthpieces inside the kingdom. And so these are people that he has really put into place. And these are people that he is now recalling to make sure that they are all continuing to practice that subjugation that he wants them to. And we could be thinking again of King Zedekiah. Jeremiah 51:59 talks about that, that he would have been summoned to demonstrate loyalty after a possible revolt that took place there. Now, the repetition of the officials' titles and the image's dedication all highlights Nebuchadnezzar's intent to unify his empire under his authority, both politically and religiously. Now, rulers do these kinds of things, especially those who are more autocratic leaning. And we even see this in more recent history. One commentary notes this story. Listen to this. In the late 1930s, in the heyday of Joe Stalin adulation and the Soviet Union, Stalin's name was mentioned in a provincial meeting. This triggered a standing ovation and a standing dilemma. For no one dared to be the first to sit down. I'm just imagining the scene. Everyone's like, hey, but no one wants to be the first to sit down. Well, finally, an elderly man, unable to stand any longer, took his seat. They noted his name and arrested him the next day. He had failed to worship the idol long enough. This still happens. And this is what we see with Nebuchadnezzar here. And so in verses 4 and 5, the herald, as the people are gathered up, the herald then loudly proclaims, he announces what the king expects of the people. They are commanded to worship the image at the sound of the orchestra. And Nebuchadnezzar has not spared any expense here. He has brought forth all these instruments, some of which, yes, do come from Greece. Greece existed at this time, and they had instrumentation. And Nebuchadnezzar, having the kinds of resources and wealth that he did, wanted to bring the very best together. And so he brought all these instruments. That's why they're all mentioned here. He had the horn, which was a kind of wind instrument, possibly formed out of silver. Then he also had the flute, or a pipe. Then there's the lyre, which is also known as a zither. I don't know if that helps you, but that is also what it's known as. It would play some higher tones. Then you had the trigon, which was a triangular lyre that also played some high tones. These would have been stringed instruments, by the way. Then you had the psaltery, which is a harp for lower tones. It was able to play some lower tones. So you can imagine these different stringed instruments that could play a variety of tones being next to each other. And then you had the bagpipe, which is not originally from Scotland. This would have been made of goat skin, of goat skin, with two reed pipes, and you would blow into it. It would fill up, and then it would play the sounds. And this bagpipe actually comes from the Greek word symphonia, from which we get our term symphony. So it by itself made a kind of symphonic sound, and then it was included with all of the rest of these instruments. Now, this is only a partial list because it says, and all kinds of music. And so there would have been other instruments that were included here. This list is given to us to help us to see just how vast, how grand this orchestra was that was leading the people. And as you think about that, it must have sounded really pretty, right? It must have sounded really nice if you were just to listen to it. If I were, maybe doing some study and I heard those kinds of songs come on, well, it may have sounded a little foreign. I may have looked and seen, okay, oh, this is from Nebuchadnezzar's Grand Orchestra, but it probably sounded really nice as you're standing there on this plane, probably only having heard one or two of these instruments being played together at any one time. Now you're hearing all these instruments, this great gathering. It probably was somewhat stirring, and it was probably an emotionally charged kind of atmosphere. And it probably helped to move the people to their knees when the time was right. The devil does use music, and he can use all kinds of music, even beautiful music. Sometimes we think of the devil's music as one or two different kinds of music. It's not. The devil can use any kind of music to accomplish his purposes. Of course, the Lord can use music for his purposes. And he created it first, and so it's his. It's not the devil's. But Satan can certainly use it for deception. And sometimes that's exactly what we see. And so the command was sent out. When you hear the music, you are to worship the statue. And I imagine that at that moment, as they are bowing down in front of this grand statue, they probably have never seen anything quite as tall as this in their lives. And certainly as they are seeing the light of the fiery furnace flicker off of the statue, it probably had a kind of eerie appearance to it. And then they're hearing this music and they're bowing. They probably thought that they were experiencing something spiritual, because that's how that works. Sometimes you think you are experiencing something, even when you may not be. Now, of course, they would be bowing down because, as is the tactic of totalitarian regimes, they had a threat hanging over their heads. If you don't do this, you will be cast into the furnace. And of course, they had this furnace set up because they were creating bricks. They were doing all kinds of things. It was common to have furnaces back then. And I think I read one commentary saying that it was probably a kind of old milk jug kind of shape, where you would have a large opening that you could feed the fuel into. It would have been large enough to even step into and walk around so that you could clear it of ash. But it would have also had a large top that kind of filtered outward so that it could expel the heat, and you would have that big opening up there to heat it up. In fact, one commentary said it could reach temperatures of up to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And so this would have been something that could have burned very hotly. And if you had a platform above it, there would have been an easy way to drop people straight into it if you wanted to. Was that common? Oh, yes, they did it. I don't know if they did it every day, but it was a known form of Babylonian punishment. And in Jeremiah 29:22, we see an example of Nebuchadnezzar killing a couple of guys by dropping them into a furnace. It's also in the code of Hammurabi that they would kill people by burning them. And so this furnace, which was already set ablaze with its smoke billowing, would have been a terrifying deterrent that would have been present right there. Because the text gives indication that the furnace was already of a burning or a blazing fire. It was not just the furnace sitting there and there was the threat of a fire being lit in the furnace, but rather the furnace already had that blazing fire active inside of it. You know, ironically, this threat mirrors God's judgment on idolatry, where he talks about burning those who do not honor him as God. Jeremiah 29:22. Also, Revelation 14:11. Other places. These verses highlight the spiritual stakes that are there in the moment. But the Jews would only know of the commandments of God as they faced their moment of decision. Now, overwhelmed by the king's command, the awe-inspiring image, the sound of the music, as we've noted, the people bow down. And if the gathering included Zedekiah and his royal household, guess what? The Jews that were there bowed down too. Although we're not told explicitly about that. Maybe they did it out of expedience. Whatever the case is, they bowed down. They recognized Nebuchadnezzar's political and religious authority. The text repetition here of the instruments of the diverse peoples emphasizes universal compliance. All the peoples did this everywhere. The whole crowd is involved in false worship. This is the drive of idolatry in the world. And it happens. It happens all the time. And sometimes the idolatry that is offered up, you might say, well, if I were faced with a situation like that, I would not bow. But we bow to other idols in our lives easily. We bow to the idols of materialism. We bow to the idol of self. We bow to the idol of cultural norms sometimes. We have to recognize these things. We don't always see it. We just say, oh, well, that's what everybody's doing. That's not an idol. Well, everybody was bowing to this idol. We have to recognize that. And this drive can come with promises of reward. It can come with consequences of exclusion if we don't participate. We face moments where conformity seems easier than standing firm. That's what we see here with the drive toward idolatry. And if anyone does not conform, well, there is a demeaning for refusing idolatry, and that's what we see in verses 8 through 12. Ooh, I'm so glad I didn't go through the whole chapter tonight. Ooh, all right. We still got a little ways to go just to make it through what we're supposed to get through. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyres, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. There's always got to be someone snitching. And that's what we see here. There are going to be those who call it out. The demand of loyalty and fealty here was a chance for some people to take advantage of the people of God. And that's what's highlighted here in the text. The Chaldeans came forward. These were the priests, the soothsayer priests, the astrologers. They may have been people who were ethnically Babylonian. And that adds a layer to this as we see them in contrast to the Jews. But they also may have just simply been people who had a heritage of pagan practices. But even then, they are being subjugated by slaves, the Jews. People like Daniel and his friends, young men at that. And so there may have been a heart of envy that was driving them to call out the actions. Yeah, it could have been racism. It's hard to say exactly what was here. These were individuals, though, who would have been in communion with dark spirits. These would have been people who would have been listening to demons. And these are people who may have also been somewhat convicted of conscience as they saw the men of God doing what was right. And they didn't like that. Whatever exactly was happening, whether they wanted to silence their hearts within them or they wanted to get one up on these ethnic and professional usurpers, they call out the Jews, their refusal to worship. This echoes a broader kind of anti-Semitism that is rampant through history and that is growing again today. It is all online. You see it in the world. Of course, there's always been people who have been anti-Semitic, but today we are definitely seeing it rise again, and it reflects ongoing rebellion against the Lord as people are speaking against God, Scripture, and the people that God has used in the past and that God will one day again use. But whatever the case here, they approach the king, the Chaldeans do, with accusations. And we read that they brought charges. The term for charges actually means that they ate the pieces. They are seeking to devour the Jews. They began with flattery in verse 9, "O king, live forever." This common expression of respect. They are setting themselves up as the loyal servants as they reiterate the command of the king and highlight just how the Jews were disobeying the king. And so in verse 12, they launched their attack against God's chosen people. And just like other anti-Semites, they say it's the Jews, they're the problem, and they identify by name Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They highlight too that these men have roles that the king himself has appointed. He has set them in place. I don't think that they're necessarily trying to blame the king there, because that would have been a political mismaneuvering. They probably rather are trying to highlight the fact that these individuals are being ungracious toward Nebuchadnezzar, or in some other way being insubordinate to him and not being thankful for that position that he has given to them. Their charge is threefold. They disregard the king, they do not serve his gods, excuse me, they do not serve his gods, and they refuse to worship the image that he has commanded. This is public defiance, and it is at the heart of a time when he is trying to get unity within the empire. And so these three deserve the severest of consequences. Now, so we're going through that. You might say, wait a minute. There seems to be a name missing here. Where's Daniel in all of this? Because if he had been there, surely they would have identified him as well. They would have named him as well, because there's no one who believes that Daniel would have bowed down and his friends were the ones who stayed standing. No, of course he would have stood with his friends. So where was Daniel? And of course the text doesn't tell us exactly, but we have to assume that because all of these important officials are gathered in this one place, and Nebuchadnezzar, too, he is gathered there as well. Someone needs to be in the royal court of Babylon, continuing to administrate what needs to happen there. Someone has to be at home watching. Even though Nebuchadnezzar and the rest might only be 4 miles away, there are still things and responsibilities that must be done. And because of Daniel's high position, I think that's what the Reformation Study Bible points out, because of his high position, he may have been excused from this gathering. Nebuchadnezzar may not have had Daniel and his 3 friends in his sights with this gathering. He was looking outward. He was looking to the peoples. He was looking to the different languages. He was looking beyond his palace to make sure that the empire was being unified. He was not looking inside his palace to make sure that they were all unified inside there, because he had already chosen those men. Those were the loyal men. Those were the good men. And so Daniel probably was just taking care of things at home, as it were, inside the royal palace, while all of this is going on. Maybe there's even a part of Nebuchadnezzar who knew, or which knew, that if he had invited Daniel, Daniel would not have bowed. And he just said, you know what, I'm not going to deal with that. Daniel's fine. He wasn't looking to Daniel. He wasn't even looking to Daniel's friends. But now they have been highlighted. Believers today will sometimes get unexpectedly highlighted in some kind of sweep. And we may not have even been the target of the world's scorn. Maybe there was something else, and then we get highlighted because we don't conform. COVID was a great example of that. We just need everybody to shut down for 2 weeks. 2 weeks to slow the spread, right? Or to flatten the curve. And then churches began meeting again. And suddenly it did become a battle between church and state. That was a question then. That was something that got highlighted. We don't know what comes down the pipe later on. And sometimes we will have to stand on some conviction that will invite the ridicule, the scorn of those around us. Where suddenly, where we were in an honored position, perhaps, we are now being looked at as traitors, as people who cause problems. And this is what has happened in Rome. This has happened in other places. This happens in communist regimes, and this can certainly happen in the West. It will happen one day under the Antichrist. And so we must be aware But there is a demeaning for refusing idolatry. We have to be aware of the idolatry when it comes, because we don't want to mindlessly bow with everyone else. We have to be steadfast, and we have to trust in God even amid persecution. And that's what Daniel's friends are about to see next. As we move on to the next point here, verses 13 through 15, the demand for idolatry. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and other kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" Wow. Well, there it is. Nebuchadnezzar responds in rage and anger. You know what that means? That's probably just a way of saying he was really, really upset. He was really mad. You know, dictators sometimes do get pretty upset when you defy them. And that's what we see here. And he wouldn't have believed that. Of all who might have opposed him, of all that he might have cast into that furnace that night, that it would be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This may have been part of his anger. These are the trusted men of the palace, and these are the ones who are defying me. He gives orders for them to be brought before him for a confrontation, and he questions the three directly. His questions focus on their refusal to serve as gods and worship the image, highlighting the unity that Nebuchadnezzar wanted. And the unity in his mind between the religious and political dimensions that are there at that night. His surprise suggests that he didn't initially target them. He wasn't looking toward them. He was probably looking toward the king of Judah. He was probably looking in the direction of some other people. And here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they don't bow. This makes their open defiance all the more striking. Now, maybe he's calmed a bit. Maybe he has something else in mind. He gives a temporary stay to their execution because, remember, it was supposed to be immediately they get cast into a furnace. He says, "Bring them here." And he asks them, and what does he do? He gives them a second chance. He says, "Let's get the orchestra ready to play again." And he says, "If you're ready, we will do this. We will see you bow down." Why does he do that? Maybe it's out of respect for their abilities. Maybe it's a reluctance to lose such capable men in his administration. Whatever the case, he still threatens them directly. And he warns them that there will be an immediate execution should they refuse again. But he doesn't leave it there. He has to throw in one more comment. I think he's drunk on his own power at this point. Sometimes sinners can get a little intoxicated with themselves, especially those who have authority. And he says, "What God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" Okay. Now, he has set up the stage. He is directly defying Yahweh, the God of Israel. He's not the first person to do this. We read in our Bible reading of the king of Assyria doing this. We read of Pharaoh doing this in Exodus chapter 5. Nebuchadnezzar pits his authority against Yahweh's. Well, God is not going to leave this challenge unanswered. And when we get down to verse 47, we're going to see, or not 47, or excuse me, when we get down to the end of this chapter, we're going to see that God does answer this. In verse 47 of chapter 2, the king had said to Daniel, "Surely your God is a God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries." Nebuchadnezzar is going to get reminded of that. And we will see that. But his challenge here reflects the current arrogance that's in his heart and the arrogance of any who believe that they can oppose God. But we trust, even in the midst of that, even if the person does have power and authority over us, we still trust in the power of a sovereign God who is greater, who is able to deliver us or sustain us through trials. And that's the example that we see in these three men. And that brings us to the final act that we're studying tonight, the defiance against idolatry, verses 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Oof. The gauntlet has been thrown down. We can only imagine the emotions that they would have been experiencing at this point. You may imagine the emotions that you would be experiencing as you would be standing in this very situation. But what's recorded here is indicative of a calm resolve. They answer respectfully but firmly. There's no sense of defiance here. Now, of course, there are some things that get a little lost in translation. You may wonder, okay, what are they saying then when they say we do not need to give you an answer? It almost sounds like that is back talk, like it is arrogance on their part. I don't think that should be read that way. The language indicates that they are saying that they don't feel a need to give a defense. They don't need, in other words, to defend themselves. Let me give you another in other words. In other words, in other words. We're guilty. It's true. We're guilty. And we don't have anything to say for ourselves. We're guilty. They're saying that their decision is final. They don't offer a defense because their allegiance to God is non-negotiable. This is a bold stand that reflects their unwavering commitment to God and to his commandments, his first commandment, to not have other gods before him. And so they begin in verse 17 with this phrase, "if it be so." And that can also be confusing in English because we might read that and say, well, did they have some doubt in their mind? Some have wondered, maybe they doubt God's existence or his ability. to save them. No, that's not what's quite being communicated either here. It's a statement of confidence, in fact. We could read it this way: if we are thrown into the furnace, our God is able. And so there is an if there, but the if is concerning their state and their outcome. And the imperfect verb here, which is he will deliver, may even be rendered this way: he may deliver. Now, this brings us to a pretty important point with how they stand. And I want you to see this. They aren't speaking for God. God hasn't told them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I am going to deliver you from this furnace. Don't be afraid. It would be nice if he did that. And then they could be standing firm and they would know, okay, we're standing on the promise of God. They don't know. They don't know if God's going to save them. They do know that God's able to save them. They don't know if God will save them. And that brings us to what's so important here. Their faith is not in deliverance. Their faith is in God. The God who can deliver and the God who may not deliver if he so chooses, but they still will follow him. Sometimes we will be faced with trials and persecutions, and the worst comes. There are people who do face the barrel of the gun and a choice. Reject God, renounce him, renounce Jesus Christ, or die. And the person does not renounce Jesus, and the trigger gets pulled. There are times that happens. There are other times where the trigger is pulled and nothing happens. The gun jams. The bullet is a dud. Something else happens. The person misses. God can deliver, but God doesn't always deliver. Do you still stand firm? It's easy to stand firm if you know everything's going to be okay. Oh, yeah. Do your worst. It's easy to stand firm then. It's not quite so easy when you don't know how it's going to turn out. Now you're starting to see why I'm choosing to stop here. Because they don't know yet what's about to come. And we're going to pretend like we haven't read the rest. Because we're with them in this moment. They are standing firm. And look at what they say, their boldness. They say, even if he does not what? Does not deliver them. Even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. This is their faith. This is how firm that they are going to stand. And it is because of their dedication to God. They're not going to speak where God hasn't spoken. And they don't know what God's going to do. But they do know this, that God has said, you shall have no other gods before me. And they are going to stay strong on that. Their resolve echoes Job's confession. Job 13:15. Though he slay me, I will hope in him. Though he slay me, I will hope in him. It's one thing to talk about the sovereignty of God when we think, okay, he's going to take care of everything. It's another thing to trust in him and his sovereignty when he might say he's going to burn everything. He's going to allow it to fall. One day he will. One day he will. We still must trust in him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego model this unwavering faith. They know that God is able. But even if he doesn't deliver them, they'll obey him. Though none go with them, still they will follow. No turning back. No turning back. Let's wrap this up. This account is a shining example to us to remind us to stand firm in our faith. Even if that means our faith is facing the fire. The world will pressure us to bow down to its idols. It will demean us for refusing, and it will demand compliance, even with threats. And yet, like these three, we can defy idolatry with courage. And we can trust in God's sovereignty. And that doesn't mean that he's always going to deliver. Remember, their faith was not in deliverance. It was in God. A God who can deliver. And a God who may choose not to deliver. We likewise bow to his sovereign plans. Whether we face subtle distractions or overt persecutions, let's echo their resolve. We will not serve your gods. May we, by God's grace, face our own fiery trials with faith, bringing glory to his name.